Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in welcoming our television and webcast viewers. My name is Fred Mifflin, President of the Canadian Club of Toronto, and I hope that 2017 is off to a great start to you all. Thank you for joining us today. For 120 years, the Canadian Club has been at the forefront of providing a venue for the free and open exchange of ideas on issues that impact our daily lives and challenge our thinking. Through our programs and activities, we offer access to dynamic business, political, and public figures from around the world. Today's panelists are a great example. Before I formally introduce them, here's a preview of some of our upcoming events. Next Thursday, January 19th, the day before the U.S. inauguration, our SAGE political panel of David Hurley, Kathleen Monk, and Jamie Watt, moderated by Don Newman, will discuss the agenda of the new U.S. administration and its potential impact on Canada. And on Tuesday, January 24th, the Honourable Kevin Flynn, Ontario's Minister of Labour and Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services, will be at our podium. You can order tickets and review the club's full list of upcoming events at canadianclub.org. You can also join the conversation via Twitter. Please follow us at CDNCLUBTO or simply use that hashtag. I want to extend special thanks to our event sponsor, the National Post, for its long-standing collaboration with us. Also, today's event is being made possible in part by our sponsors, Borden Ladner Gervais, Echelon Wealth Partners, EY, and Scotiabank. Thank you for your generous support. And now the time of truth, when we put our panelists on the spot to predict what awaits us for this year. We're fortunate to have some of the country's most respected and insightful journalists, columnists, and financial experts participating in this forward-looking conversation. What will the impact of the change in American politics mean for markets? How will leadership races here at home play out? How will the U.S. trade agenda impact Canada? What are the implications for resource prices, our dollar, and our international competitiveness? These are but a few of the questions our panel will address. Again this year, we're fortunate to have Bruce Sellery in the role of moderator. He's a personal finance columnist for Money Sense magazine and a contributor to CBC Radio. Joining Bruce are Claudia Cattaneo, Western business columnist, The National Post; Jean-François Perault, Senior Vice President and Chief Economist, Scotiabank; Amanda Lang, anchor, Bloomberg Television Canada; Andrew Coyne, national columnist, Post Media; and Diane Francis, FP Editor-at-Large, The National Post. Bruce and panelists, welcome. The Canadian Club of Toronto's podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Fred. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. 40 years. I love, Anne-Marie, that you began by recapping some of the topics that would have been relevant at this event so long ago. It was funny to hear those topics and also profoundly depressing, as if nothing has changed in the world with the sole exception of the invention of Netflix. That's all that's different. We are thankful for Netflix. And today we actually have an option. We could proceed with the event as scheduled, or we could play the 16mm black and white film of the event that we saw 40 years ago. I don't know. Let's do it all again. Let's do it over. Pierre Trudeau was Canadian Prime Minister. Jimmy Carter was the President-elect of the United States. Now, in hindsight, his worst threat, his big risk factor for the U.S. electorate was solely for those people with a peanut allergy. Otherwise, he was completely harmless. But for those who couldn't handle peanuts, it was the worst thing ever. 1 year ago, so not 40 years ago, but 1 year ago, we were in this room in January of 2016, and just one of our panelists accurately predicted the U.S. election. So credit where credit is due to Terence Corcoran. A round of applause for Terence Corcoran. I say finish on a high, right, Terry? I mean, that was a prediction. So specifically, here's the direct quote. I watched the entire hour-long event, and here's what Terry said. The Republicans will win the presidency with Rubio or Trump. Trump has a good chance. His views on trade, anti-TPP, have broad appeal. Clinton has a lot of negatives on her side. And that was quite true. Andrew Coyne, that's not what you said.
Not exactly.
Not exactly. No. Do you recall what you said, or at least what was going through your mind at this event?
Not a chance in hell that Trump could win, I believe.
Yeah,
Something along those lines.
not even a chance. I think that's kind of, I will boldly predict that Trump will not be the nominee, yeah, with a little bit of that. So that's where we were. Today we're going to talk about some bold predictions, and we'll get together in 12 months to see which ones actually come to fruition. So we're going to begin with the discussion. Send up your questions if you want to ask any, and then we're going to round things out and finish by asking each of our panelists for their last word. It could be a hope, it could be a fantasy, it could be something that they believe will occur in the year ahead. We are going to begin with politics because there is such a clear tie to the political environment, both in the U.S. and Canada, and our financial outlook. And where we're going to begin is with the Conservative leadership race, which culminates, of course, May 27th, 2017. And I want to begin with Amanda Lang. You actually know Kevin O'Leary pretty well. Would that be a fair characterization?
Kevin who?
Yeah, you know who I'm talking about? Kevin
know
O'Leary.
him.
So here's my question.
Yes.
Will Kevin O'Leary become the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada?
Hell no.
Now, I appreciate that you took some time to think about your answer. That was really thoughtful and grounded. What would support your view of that outcome?
So I was admitting at lunch that for a long time my views about Donald Trump were colored by what I wished were true. And I came to realize that at some point. So I wish that I'm right about this. I think the impediments are too large. You know, the old joke about the guy who wants to win the lottery and he can't, but he says, God, I've been such a good Christian, why can't I win the lottery? And God booms down, meet me halfway, buy a ticket. I don't think he'll put his hat in the ring in the end. I think he's seriously exploring it. In fact, I know he's seriously exploring it, but I think the impediments, including the French language issue, are just too big.
Andrew Coyne, what do you think? Who's going to win this?
Well, having utterly discredited myself on the last time, I find it hard to believe that O'Leary or Kelly Leitch could win, largely because of the rules of the race. Every riding counts equally. They're each awarded 100 points. The points are awarded proportionally, not winner take all, and it's a ranked ballot. When you put all that together, it's entirely the opposite of the way that Trump won the Republican nomination, where it was a field divided against him, but it was most of those states were winner take all. So if you were a polarizing candidate like he was, you could win. Much more likely in this race that you're going to need second and third choices. I don't know who's going to win, but I think the sort of final sort of three will most likely be Bernier, Leitch, and Andrew Scheer. And it'll be one of those.
Diane, on which issues do you think this leadership race will turn?
The Tory leadership race?
Yeah. What's going to be most relevant? What are people really going to be talking about?
I think people want to know an alternate vision. I think Canadians are pretty fiscally prudent. I think that I hear a lot of chatter about the deficits that the current Prime Minister is going to position us with, belabor us with. And so if there's a credible Conservative alternative to that choice, but on the other hand, he's made very few mistakes, if any. And I think he's going to be very difficult to unseat. And some people have said it has to be a female to unseat him. They just feel that that would be the best option.
Claudia, you have lived in Alberta for 30 years. You have been around a long time, and you would have a shared memory of Trudeau Sr. and the negative perceptions people have of that time and the negative perceptions that that name still carries. What is most relevant in 2017 for Trudeau, for his leadership, for his Tim Hortons tour that he has recently embarked on? What's the West say?
I think people will be watching the pipeline file very closely, as well as carbon pricing. They will want him to deliver on pipelines just because he approved a couple of pipelines. They haven't been built yet. There's still a lot of opposition to that. People in Alberta and Saskatchewan are very angry that they're having to pay a very high price for these pipeline approvals. And so if he doesn't deliver, watch out.
JF, you spent a lot of time at the Department of Finance. You know the budget process well. You now are at Scotia, and welcome, by the way. This is your first tour at this event. What do you predict the budget's going to look like? Based on your view as an economist, I know you're not like, it would be a slight conflict of interest if you were engaged in that process still, but there is the promise of deficits. How big will they be? What are you thinking about?
Well, I'm pretty sure deficits will last throughout their mandate. I don't think that's I can't imagine being otherwise. You know, we're thinking deficits of like 27, 30 billion, basically, not quite as far as the eye can see, but certainly next couple of years very, very easily. This is a government, I think, who is still in the process of identifying what it wants to do economically. You know, it's got its growth strategy. They're thinking about innovation. They have all kinds of ideas or all kinds of processes in place to try and raise productivity and do things a little bit differently than the previous government. And I think, unfortunately, that probably means a bit of a bigger government than we're used to, and that means bigger deficits, unless they want to do tax increases, which they've already done. I don't know how much more they can get out of the economy rather than relative to what they've already done.
Andrew, cabinet shuffle. What did you make of those moves, and how will they affect Canada's fortunes?
Well, I think that they had to make a change at foreign affairs, whereas as they insist on calling it global affairs, but I noticed that nobody else does. Diane, whatever his other strengths, was not the right pick, I think, for that job generally, and certainly not for the changing times that we're in with Donald Trump in the White House, for as long as Donald Trump remains in the White House.
What do you mean by that? You don't. I'm not going to force you to be definitive on that front. You say it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but there is a scenario in which he maybe doesn't fulfill.
There's a scenario in which he doesn't make it to Inauguration Day.
And to be clear, that's not your request. That's just a prediction.
I mean, there's so many wild cards, obviously, with this guy, and then with the latest revelations, adding to what was previously known, the whole Russia file is one that is extraordinary. If any of these allegations are true, it is the stuff of impeachment. But obviously that will ultimately be decided by the Republican Congress, who will take their cue from where they think the public is at. So you can't really predict any of these things. But what's certainly true is across a whole range of policy fronts, whether you're talking trade or taxes or immigration or environment policy or defense or foreign policy, everything has been changed for this government in terms of how it deals with Americans and what its expectations are. So a good bunch of their energies are going to be consumed with dealing with that. And obviously having somebody in the foreign affairs job who has entree in Washington, who has a bit of diplomatic tact, who has knowledge of, deep knowledge of some of these issues, particularly in the trade file, obviously Christopher Freeland was a good choice from that standpoint. There were also obviously some weak links that they would like to did deal with in the shuffle that you probably would have let ride for longer if you didn't have to. But once they knew they had to make that change, I think everything else followed from that.
Amanda, what's your take?
Well, I would add that it's significant to lump the U.S. trade mandate in with foreign affairs. That's a new thing. Obviously, the new trade minister has a much smaller brief, especially with TPP on life support. So that strikes me as interesting and kind of telling about where the focus is going to be and what her mandate is.
What do you think about Freeland's Russian connections? I don't mean like in a mafia way. I mean the fact that she's worked there, that she speaks the language. That would be in some ways a pro and in some ways perhaps a con.
Well, I mean, it depends on how you look at it. Anybody who's read Red Notice, and everybody should read Red Notice, Bill Browder's book, well, she's in it and she's featured heavily. She's got huge credibility for that reason as kind of anti-Putin status. I don't think that hurts us at all. I think, to me, the more interesting question, actually, and I'd be curious to hear what others here think about it, is what appears to be the early steps by our government to really distance themselves from the Trump administration, and whether that's a pro or a con, whether it's a visit to Cuba or just sort of a couple of steps that really seem to be signaling we're going to go our own on some issues, which could backfire.
Yeah. Diane, what do you think? Will Trump's first state visit be to Ottawa, or will it be to Moscow?
No, it may be to Washington, D.C., because he prefers to stay in New York.
Do you think they're going to hire a local guide to show him some of the sites? Because he may have not ever been to the States.
It's quite
to
a
the
nice
federal
city,
capital.
and the house is pretty cool, too. But anyway, she doesn't like the decor. The thing is that I think that he is going to, I think that he is going to bilateralize the world. That is to say, multilateralism, which favors countries that are smaller like us. We're a big country, but we're smaller than the Americans. Everybody is no longer going to be around with him. And so it's going to be a reconstitution of trading relationships based on bilateralism with the big guy. And he's going to get what he wants. And I'm not talking about him personally. I'm saying the big United States. So if you're in a bilateral trading relationship as opposed to a multilateral where a lot of little guys can gang up and get a compromise out of the big guy, it really changes everything. All that being said, I do want to say Canada is going to be treated, not going to be treated roughly at all. We're going to get Keystone, but we're going to have to give some offsets, probably more defense spending. That's what I've speculated. But apart from that, our labor rates are not ridiculously low. And the trading relationship is absolutely in harmony. There's almost a trade balance. They sell as much to us in goods and services as we sell to them. So we're not a problem. The guys that are going to have the problem are the guys with the supply chains that have gone NAFTA, and that's your auto parts guys. They have a lot of stuff down in Mexico, and that's going to be an issue. So they're going to have to rework it and maybe write off things and move things around. So I think that we're going to get off lightly. However, they're going to be boss. Make no mistake.
Claudia, you're nodding. Do you agree with they're going to be boss?
I actually just wanted to make a point on the Keystone XL pipeline. It's supposed to be one of the first things that he does. And if he does approve that pipeline, to me, he's going to send a message to Canada that you don't want the oil sands, we'll take them. And it's actually going to mean that Alberta is going to become even more interrelated economically with the United States than it's been so far.
What do executives in Calgary really, really want? Kellyanne Conway canceled her visit. She was supposed to be there. In fact, I think it might have been today or soon. Anyway, she's not going. What do they want? What do they hope to see?
$100 a barrel oil.
$100 a barrel oil.
That's all they want.
Right.
Although they know they're not going to get that for a long time. I think what they want is, first of all, an end to the obstructionism that we have seen against projects, because nothing is getting done. They want to be able to export. So whether it's to the United States, whether it's to the Canadian coasts, whether it's through LNG, they want to be able to export their product. And it hasn't happened so far. If Keystone gets approved, they will take their stuff down south, because the United States, even under Obama, has been able to increase their oil and gas production. They've built a lot of pipelines. They've built LNG terminals. We haven't been able to do that. And so they'll just keep strengthening those ties.
This is for anyone. Will NAFTA be repealed? Will it be fundamentally renegotiated?
I think it'll be tweaked and iterated. I think a repeal is a very onerous process. It has to go through Congress. I don't think they want to trash it. I don't think they want to, get rid of Mexico as a trading partner by any stretch. But this is about jobs for people at home. And I think there'll be some tweaking. With Canada, I would welcome the fact that this is probably going to mark going back to the FTA, which is how it all started. Mexico came along later and has been a problem politically in the U.S. For the Americans. So I think that we in Canada and the U.S. would have been a lot more economically integrated with fewer border hassles than we would have had we not had a three-way deal. So I think it's just back to the old kind of auto-pact relationship and hopefully friendly.
JF, you have to watch all of this through the lens of an economist, a chief economist at a major bank. What did you think watching the press conference?
I honestly thought the market reaction was a little bit foolish, because this was not a press conference set up to talk about economic and financial matters. It was a press conference to talk about some of his kind of
Twitter hashtags.
Yeah. Which I think speaks to the bigger issue with respect to Trump and markets, which is a tremendous amount of uncertainty as to how he will approach economic policy, what he's going to say, when he's going to say it, how easy it is to get under his skin, how unpredictable he may be in terms of his views on any given issue, given that he seems to have a relatively easy time to be provocative and change his mind on stuff. And I think from a business perspective, that's a pretty troubling development, because we're in a world now where, as we've seen over the last number of years, financial markets can be incredibly volatile for any number of reasons. But they've tended not to be volatile by virtue of, the president or the administration of the main market in the world kind of creating all kinds of uncertainty across essentially every asset class, from the very real kind of side to the incredibly creative and innovative side. And I think that's something that we're going to be struggling with quite tremendously over the next little while.
Did Janet Yellen's job fundamentally change when those election results came in? How hard would it be to be in her role, given Trump's predilection for getting his nose into lots of parts of government and of service that he might not supposed to be doing?
So I don't think it's changed very much. I think from a central banker's perspective, and Yellen is an independent central banker, I don't think she would be of the mind to feel that there's political influence in terms of her ability to deliver on her mandate. I think what complicates her life tremendously is there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty in terms of his economic platform and what that means for the U.S., right? Whether he undertakes an extremely large fiscal plan remains to be seen, whether he imposes large tariffs. Tariffs from a central bank perspective are kind of nasty, right? Because you raise the price level, and at the same time, it's a negative supply shock. So you're reducing growth. It's like the worst of all scenarios. And for the Fed, who's got a dual mandate of growth and inflation, that creates a real problem. But I don't think it'll be an issue in terms of her feeling that there's kind of a political imperative to her to behave in a certain way. It's just going to be a very difficult environment for her to make decisions in.
Andrew.
Just to reinforce the point about generalized uncertainty, none of us can predict with any conviction what Trump is going to do on any issue, because on every issue during the campaign, he was on every side of it. And on the ones on which he was consistent, his cabinet picks are going into the confirmation hearings and taking the diametrically opposed position. So, for example, Mattis, his defense pick, just was saying that the gravest foreign crisis since World War II is Russia's attempts to pry apart NATO. This is a somewhat different line than Trump was taking. So the other element of uncertainty is, and maybe more reassuring is, he has to work with the Republican Congress, most of whom are not of the Trump frame of mind on things. And there is this kind of weird, uneasy alliance going on now between Trump and Paul Ryan, who are, again, polar opposites in many ways. As I say, that's reassuring in that he can propose, but the Congress disposes. So the stuff that's going to get through Congress, I think, will be of a somewhat more cautious and conservative frame of mind.
Amanda, what are the other risk factors that we haven't yet flagged? So we've talked trade, we've talked a little bit about tax. What are some of the other ones that are relevant for Canada?
Well, where Trump is concerned, the problem is they're unknowable, but they could be severe. So to me, the biggest unknowable risks are geopolitical in nature. His intemperance, his inability to actually have a kind of a structure around his thinking about global events makes me nervous. I'll tell you one thing I've been watching with some dismay is the reaction by corporate America to a president-elect with no ability to shape policy for some time. And to Andrew's point, even then, it'll be measured against his ability to get it through Congress, and seeing corporate CEOs making strategic decisions apparently based on his views. I have to assume that there are better strategic reasons for Ford to make the decision it did, but to me that's somewhat alarming. Markets are irrational. People will make daily investment decisions based on ridiculous emotional events, and that's fine. And if they want to do that, good for them. CEOs aren't supposed to be.
But that, if they do get the corporate tax rate down to 15 or 20%, that's a huge challenge for us all. We spent many years in this country trying to get our corporate tax rates competitive. And just as we did, along comes, we were basically relying upon the fact the United States had the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world, and suddenly all that's changed. So that's a more positive strategic challenge for us.
Amanda, we're going to talk about Canadian market in a minute, but I want to stick to the U.S. for a second. And you talk to market watchers, traders, institutional, Bloomberg, this is what they do. What have you gleaned from all that commentary about what has gone on in the U.S. markets over the course of the last couple of months, even in the lead up to the election?
There's a lot of optimism. There really is. To Andrew's point, there is a well-founded expectation that corporate tax rates will come down. And so if you just price in a margin increase based on tax rates alone, you see a market improvement. There's a lot of optimism about the Trump administration's ability to improve the U.S. economy. I think it's overdone. And clearly there are a lot of market players who believe the last couple of months market move has been overdone, but we're seeing a bit of it tempering now. But people are very bullish on the U.S. market, more bullish, I think, than they ought to be.
Claudia.
Yeah, in terms of geopolitical implications, he wants to make the United States
Great again. Great again. Oh, wait,
also energy independent. And the U.S. was already on that path. I think under Trump, that will accelerate. And that has huge geopolitical implications because the U.S. is no longer going to be dependent on Middle East oil. So I'm not quite sure how that will play out, but definitely we're going to see a United States that will be an exporter of both oil and gas. And a competitor, actually, to the Middle East.
JF, you talked about tax. Andrew picked up that thread on corporate tax, personal tax. What about border adjustment tax? What about the sort of very deep and intricate world of taxation that can affect the ease with which our two countries trade?
Well, you know, the border tax is intellectually appealing, I think, in concept. I think the reality is a tax that fundamentally shifts the burden of taxation away from exporters and onto importers to some degree is going to face a tremendous amount of political resistance in the U.S., right? I mean, the reality is the U.S. imports more than it exports. That means by taxing imports to the extent that a border tax would imply, you're effectively raising prices for a large segment of the population, and a large segment of the population which is largely low income or in lower income streams as well. So in terms of him achieving one of his objectives, which is to support the middle class. I mean, he kind of ran on, he's there for the little guy, he's all this kind of stuff. The border tax or taxes, of a kind of a tariff nature, are extremely hurtful for those very people. So I don't think there's much of a likelihood that goes forward. I know it's very prominent in the context of the congressional conversation. So I don't think it's possible from a political perspective. On top of that, I mean, there are very serious legal challenges from a WTO perspective. And their ability to do anything on the tariff side is, I think, severely. I think there's much less optionality that they, in practice, than they think in their heads at this point.
Andrew, Diane, how do you think the debt ceiling conversation is going to play out in the U.S.? That receives so much airtime, so much conversation, and now Trump looking for tax cuts. Wouldn't that exacerbate the issue?
Well, I think it's going to be a love affair between the Republican-controlled Congress and this Republican president. For a while, they'll just make a deal, and he's good at that. They'll make a deal. I don't think it'll be acrimonious as it was where we were nearly on the ledge, for goodness sake, a few years back. And he is a spender. He's going to be a spender president.
We're all going to get and are getting a refresher course in the virtues of checks and balances, to the extent, again, that he respects checks and balances. But one of the things that they all have to respect is that there are elections every 2 years in the United States. So one of the dangers, I think, for not just Trump but for the Republican Congress is that you overread your mandate. And remember, of course, that he lost the popular vote in this election. So there was no sort of sweeping endorsement of Trumpism, whatever Trumpism is. And while people may have been in a mood to sort of, throw a brick through the window of this election, they may still be in that mood 2 years from now and have different targets in mind. So the Republicans have to be conscious that they have, while they have control of both houses and of the presidency now, all that could change. At least most of that could change in the 2 years from now. So there's checks on what they can do.
Claudia, this one's for you. Question from the floor on the theme of the elections. Is the NDP done in Alberta?
Good question.
It is kind of a good question, and I'll also include in that question the leadership race. Kenny appears to be the front runner, so you can weave that into your answer.
I try not to be too political, but there is incredible frustration in Alberta with the NDP. It's seen as an illegitimate government that is out of touch with reality there. We have incredible unemployment, and yet the taxes keep coming. Between corporate taxes, income tax increases, property tax increases, and now the carbon tax, which is very high. So I think Jason Kenney will win the leadership race in March. He will channel a lot of that frustration. I think he'll be a more effective leader of the opposition. And yes, I think the NDP is done.
Is a merger with the Wild Rose critical for Kenny to take that job?
Actually, it isn't. It doesn't have to be a formal merger. I think he's going to win the BC leadership first, and then other people will follow him, or he'll have to work something out with the Wild Rose. But I think he's already got a lot of support. So, and it's just a question of what his agenda will look like. So, is it going to be going further right to capture the Wild Rose agenda, or is it going to be going further to the center to capture those NDP votes that elected Notley?
Diane.
Yeah, I think he's putting, get back to Trump, he's putting together a pretty credible cabinet. I felt a lot better, even though he's called Madman Hatter or whatever his name is. I think he's very credible. Some of the others are good. I think the biggest risk with Trump is Twitter. I think that, seriously, at 3 in the morning in his penthouse apartment in New York City, he may tweet out something that crashes a stock market or destroys a sector or a leader's reputation. And he's got to be bridled. He's got to realize he's got to be bridled, and these things have to be approved carefully, and he's got to be careful as to how people can mistake what he's saying for what he meant to say. And there are regulatory and security matters involved here.
On that, Amanda, does Trump actually tweet his own tweets, or is there an organization behind his who has orchestrated this approach?
Like a mini-me?
Like a mini-me. Like a bot. Maybe it's a bot.
No, I could be Putin. I know, I think, I mean, I don't know what you all think. I think it's him. I think he's nuts.
That's a bold prediction. Take that.
Somebody was suggesting the other day that if you are a publicly listed corporation in the United States, you need to have somebody deputized to be awake at 3 in the morning in case Trump mentions you in his Twitter, so.
They are, and they are. The other thing, too, that he has a mean streak, and he's a bully. We know that. This is his personality, and he brags about it. Can you see a scenario where he wants to get even with some reporter he doesn't like, or some congressperson he doesn't like, or anybody he doesn't like, and calls upon people to go after that person and something results? Yeah. That's cyberbullying. So he's really got to be bridled, and he's got to realize he's got to be bridled.
Much more serious than just Twitter, and this is the thing. So I was saying, checks and balances, and isn't that a great thing? And yes, it is. But ultimately, checks and balances, the rule of law, is itself a convention. It's a convention that we obey the law. And my greatest worry about Trump is that he's so unbound by the norms, any of the norms of political or personal conduct, that you just can't predict what he would do if push came to shove. And the example I would cite is Richard Nixon was a crook when no one was looking. But once the Supreme Court said, you have to hand over the tapes, even Richard Nixon handed over the tapes.
Right.
I have no idea what a President Trump would do in the same situation, and that scares the hell out of me.
Amanda.
I was watching Barack Obama give his farewell address the other night and thinking, if only this had been shown on November 7th. I think Andrew's right. I think I think Barack Obama's right. I'll be bold and say I think Barack Obama's right. The democratic institutions in America are what are at risk. I have great faith in the American people and its institutions and its ability to overcome its worst version of itself. It does it time and again. It's like a lucky child born on third base. It's got all the attributes of a great nation by accident. But I do believe America will overcome the worst of this. There are these wild cards because I think there's a madman in the White House. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that. These are the views of mine alone, not of the Bloomberg company.
Your stock just
It's
plummeted.
okay. No one here is tweeting anything. We won't videotape any portion of this event. Yes, we will.
There's no media here, are there?
One of the institutions that have received much criticism in the U.S. was the media, and I know that I'm asking this question, Andrew, I'm going to ask it of you first, and we must acknowledge the subjectivity of your answer, given who pays your mortgage. It is this. Can you comment on the failures of the mainstream media? Or why do you think it has failed in its mandate to convey unbiased and subjectivity in published content? So obviously that is a question and a comment. You can address either or both.
Is that to me?
That's you.
The media has always failed to a greater or lesser extent. We are imperfect beings. We get things wrong. We're sometimes subjected to herd instinct. None of that is particularly new. But everybody's got their own biases and everybody's got their own perception of where the media gets it wrong and where they get it right. And I get this every day. If I say something they agree with, I'm the greatest seer that ever lived. And if I say something they disagree with, I'm name whatever string of expletives that they would have subjected to. So people's own perception, partisans see partisanship everywhere. They're convinced that if you have a different point of view on a given issue, it's because you are a shill for name the party that's involved. So yes, we have a large work to do as an industry, not just in rebuilding trust or whatever, but just trying to survive as an industry in a very changed landscape. But just the one last point I just want to make was, there's a difference between being skeptical about what you read and not just automatically believing everything you read, which is a mark of adulthood, and just reflexively rejecting everything you read because it's from the media. That's not skepticism. That's just a credulousness of another kind. And people who subscribe to that doctrine, I don't think are nearly as grown up and as cynical as they pretend. They're the opposite.
Amanda.
So I would differ with Andrew a little bit on this one. I mean, I do think, obviously, the Fourth Estate is essential, and the degree to which it's under threat in America is the whole fake news. The notion that people will stop believing things because they don't want to believe, they just decide it's fake, as the president will say, is alarming. But I do think the mainstream media in America let voters down. And a New York Times columnist said it best. At one point, he said, the media has this insistence that Hillary Clinton's foreign policy should be compared to Donald Trump's as though it's apples to oranges when it's apples to rancid meat. So because it drew ratings and eyeballs and viewers and clickbait and all of because he is a reality TV star, he drew attention that wasn't worthy and put his policies and his views on a level playing field. And I do think that they strayed in that way and did a great disservice.
But there's the point, and I don't disagree with that. But for every person who says that, and you can make a very strong case for that the media, gave Trump far too much free publicity and they created false equivalence, all those things are true. You have another group that says the media disgraced themselves in this election by so clearly plumping for Clinton and treating Trump as if he was a pariah, et cetera. And so which of those is correct? People are going to have their own perceptions, their own starting points that leads them to see equal and opposite biases with the same set of media.
Jeff?
I think the tendency has been, for those of us that have been in this game for a long time, to shoot the messenger. You don't like to hear what the media says or even the news that is accurate, that is delivered, if you don't agree with the outcomes or the person who said it. So shooting the messenger is a pretty pervasive human trait, I would say, in democracies. People have a healthy disrespect for media celebrity and media outlets. What he did was he exploited that. Every time he insulted the media, he got applause. And he got people smiling at their TV set at home. People don't like big media, and they don't like the messenger. So this was one of his biggest, I think, clarion calls for his election victory was his war against the media, and that will continue.
The other point we should make is that this is not just about the media, and this is what I find most disturbing, is there is a generalized contempt for facts, for expertise, for elites, for people who know stuff. Now, I can be as skeptical about academics, for example, is the next person, and I think universities have lost the plot in a lot of things. That's fine. But again, being skeptical is a different thing than just saying, anybody who knows anything, I'm going to reject. As somebody was saying the other day, pilots sometimes crash planes. That doesn't mean we put a men's room attendant to fly the plane. We still need people who are actually trained in flying to be the pilots. And if we go down this road where we simply say anybody who's an expert, anybody who knows anything about an issue, should automatically be rejected on that basis, we are headed towards nihilism.
JF, you're the non-journalist on this stage here.
Well, I think the striking thing from my perspective over the last year, so this relates both to Brexit and to the U.S. election, is the extent to which people can be manipulated into believing and voting for things that aren't necessarily as obviously in their favor as they think they are. You just look at, for instance, the Trump's election platform. And I mean, it gets to the media issue in general, but it just, for instance, Trump had a pro-middle class approach to the campaign. I mean, it was front center, anti-elitist, man of the people, blue-collar billionaire, all this kind of stuff. And he comes up with a tax plan that was heavily in favor of the better off people in society, which is fine, trickle down, you can believe that. But that actually raised taxes on large segments of the middle class. And that wasn't being picked up. Folks, the Trump voters, who are largely in the lower income deciles, weren't cluing in, weren't paying attention, weren't being influenced by the fact that this man was telling them that he's going to raise taxes on them, in part to pay for tax cuts for very wealthy people. And I think that speaks to an environment in which folks will believe only what they want to believe, will kind of shut out information that they think is irrelevant or doesn't coincide with their kind of a priori views, and that makes, I think, policymaking very, very difficult going forward, because you have to internalize the fact that you can convince folks that if I say these three things, I'm going to be able to get to people to support something that's not really in their interest, but it's in the interest of this other part of society. And that, I think, just makes the conversation of the political and economic and financial side very, very difficult. And that's part of what's going on in markets as well. It's just an environment where things are very, very, very difficult to price and to understand.
Amanda, where will Justin and Donald find common ground? And here is my commentary. Aside from the fact that they have the shared experience of a wealthy parent, a wealthy father, and an equal though different obsession with their hair. They can talk about that.
That's
at
funny.
length.
I think that's a good question. I do think on pipelines, I think pipelines will be one issue where there will be some common ground. I don't think that means we'll get pipelines built inside this country. I think the opposition is too great to those, but Keystone will look good for both of them. I guess I'm in the camp that agrees that the trade issues won't be as bad as the worst case scenario, and I think if not Trudeau, then his deputy. I mean, I think Freeland will go a long way towards making our life and our relationship with the United States better than it might be, for the simple reason that she's the only person in cabinet who can pick up the phone and get Wilbur Ross on the line or get Gary Cohn on the line. They know her, they like her, they trust her, and I think that will help us a lot.
Jeff.
Just on the trade issue, I agree that from a Canada-U.S. perspective, we're not likely to be in the crosshairs. I'm not particularly worried about that. I think the bigger danger is Trump's approach to trade in general. So what he does with Mexico, for instance, some of what he wants to do with Mexico, as we talked about earlier, is goes against WTO. Some of what he wants to do, or he said he wants to do on China, goes against WTO. And if he does things like that, then you're basically in the early stages of a global trade war. Yeah. And in that world, we're just as hit as everybody else, even though we might have a privileged relationship with the U.S. So, I mean, I do think that the trade aspect and what he may or may not do can have a very significant impact on us, even if indirectly, just by virtue of how loaded a question it is globally.
Claudia, I want to talk specifically about the price of crude oil and what your contacts in the oil patch believe it will amount to in 12 months, and at what point they'll turn on the spending taps again.
So we are going to see a modest recovery in oil prices. People are talking about a range of $50 to $60 a barrel. Nobody thinks it's going to go back to $100 or more, certainly not in the short term. And the reason for that is we have a lot of oil, not just in storage, but new technologies have unlocked tight oil. And there's tight oil everywhere. So a lot of the exploration is now focused on the United States and Canada, but the reality is that there's tight oil all over the world, including places like Russia. They just don't have the technology.
Amanda, a year ago you predicted oil.
Knew you were going to bring this up.
I watched the tape. You predicted oil at $70 a barrel. Things didn't play out quite the way that you saw. In this year to come, what is your prediction on oil?
Well, it's hard to see that kind of increase. Just as a reminder, in my defense, that wasn't a supply-demand call. That was a geopolitical call. What I got wrong was that at this time last year, Russia was on the outs with the world, and OPEC had Russia in its sights. And I thought that would play out positively for oil. That did not come to pass. I think the supply-demand will rule. It would be hard to sit here and suggest that, given the state of shale, that we will ever see triple-digit oil prices. I guess, we're getting to a point where you could sort of see a point where alternative energies start to mean oil really never comes back. That's not going to happen this year. But so economists, analysts are saying 55 to 65, and I won't say anything different this year.
JF, what is the Canadian dollar outlook with pipelines and production increasing? Are we seeing just a petrodollar?
I don't think so. I think what we've seen, I mean, clearly oil prices matter tremendously for the Canadian dollar. There's no question about that. But I think what we've seen over the last couple of months, and we've seen this on and off over history, is that relative economic performance matters, interest rate differentials matter, and that's what's been driving to a large degree the move in the Canadian dollar over the last little while. Now, the last couple of weeks have been different. It's not an oil thing. It's just people concerned about Trump thing. But fundamentally, interest rates matter, and we're in a world now where, at least our assessment is, U.S. interest rates are rising. 75 basis points this year, and we're in a world where the Bank of Canada will not raise interest rates this year, at least not likely. So in that kind of environment, you would expect the Canadian dollar to not do super well, and that's our forecast. So we've got the Canadian dollar depreciating a little bit. But once that interest rate channel plays out, and it's sporadic, sometimes it lasts a week, sometimes it lasts a couple of days, sometimes it lasts a couple of months. We're actually thinking the interest rate channel is going to last a little bit longer this time, maybe to mid-year as markets adjust to the possibility of higher rates in the U.S. But once that's done, you get oil prices, we think oil prices will be $58 by the end of the year. So once that happens, once you've kind of filtered the interest rate effect out, then oil prices start to drive the Canadian dollar, and we see the Canadian dollar appreciating for the rest of the year.
Amanda, I want to ask you about the TSX. So 13,000 a year ago, around 15 today, close to an all-time high. 12 months from now, what number are we going to be staring at?
Oh, I'm not going to give you a number. I'm going to take a page out of Andrew Coyne's book and say, I don't make predictions. And then you're going to say, what the hell did you agree to this panel for?
Can I simplify it?
No.
Is it same, up, or down?
I think the TSX will be up for the simple reason that I do believe that the U.S. economy will improve. Barring a trade war, I think there will be sort of positive global spillover. I think China will do better. I think commodities will stay relatively firm, and that will help, and nothing is going to hurt the banks in the next year. So you take those two things and you have a strong TSX.
Claudia, what is the next milestone on the whole pipeline conversation, and what do you predict will happen in that area in 2017?
We haven't talked about the BC election, but that's also coming up.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see whether Christy Clark wins that election, because if she doesn't, if the NDP takes that one, then all bets are off on the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And there's very little confidence in Calgary that NEGs will actually go ahead. Again, a lot of opposition. Probably the one that has the best chance at this point is Keystone XL.
Is which one, sorry?
Keystone XL.
Yeah, I mean,
Keystone happens because Tillerson can make it happen, and he's the Exxon guy. And I'm not saying he's going to act only in the best interests of his company, but obviously this is a pro-oil administration, and 20% of Exxon's assets worldwide are in Canada. He knows us very well. So probably one of the first acts that will come out of that cabinet will be the approval for Keystone. And then that will spark a conversation with, okay, Canada, what else are you going to do for us? And I think it'll be on the defense spending side.
I think it was striking, though, how personally Trudeau committed himself on Trans Mountain. He didn't have to do that. He did. At the short term, he pays a price. The environmental community gets up in arms about it. He doesn't, in the short term, get much credit from Albertans. It's going to be, I think, a huge fight to get it done, not just in terms of legal challenges, but extra-legal, and which concerns me. That people who are opposed to this have decided this is an existential threat and that they are justified in virtually any tactic to oppose it. And I think it's going to be a huge, messy brawl. But what I will say is, if it is as big a tough a fight as I think it's going to be, and if the thing gets built nevertheless, I do think at that point Trudeau starts to get some credit in the West.
In a moment, I'm going to ask each of our panelists for their hope for 2017. But before I do that, Andrew, I want to ask one last wild card prediction for you, and it is this. Will Conrad Black receive a pardon from Trump?
He would certainly have earned it.
Why do you say that? Because of his prolific editorials in support of...
He's been making the case for Trump that others won't make. To be fair to both of them, as I understand it, and I may be wrong on this, but as I understand it, when his lordship was in jail, Trump came to visit him, which he didn't have to do. And I would imagine if I were in jail and everyone else had forsaken me, and somebody came to visit me, I would be impressed by that. And I think the other thing is, I think there's a contrarian thing that kicks in with all of us as columnists, and I think Conrad sees the whole world denouncing Trump, and he can't resist saying, well, they're all wrong, and here's why they're all wrong. But yeah, he could well be pardoned. In that case, he might be a good choice for ambassador.
I don't even know what to do with that. All right, we're going to round it out with a last word or a hope for 2017. Claudia, I'm going to begin with you. It's 30 seconds. Looking ahead to 2017, this could be a prediction or it could be a hoped for, as diluted and unicorn-filled as that might be.
Okay. Well, my hope is that we're never going to see Jane Fonda back in Canada to tell us what to do.
Unless it's on her Netflix show. All right, JF.
My hope is that we avoid a trade war.
Amanda.
My hope is that the government reverses a policy JF partially was responsible for and raises the GST.
I wasn't responsible for that.
Partially. Didn't you
Partially
help
responsible.
write that budget?
You guys can have a thumb war after to talk about who is responsible for cutting the GST. Andrew, your hope for 2017?
Not with any great expectation it'll be realized, but that we can recover an ability to argue politics from a basis of a shared set of facts and with respect to rationality and to treating each other as if we are people of goodwill who have differences of opinion and not simply demonizing each other.
Diane.
I hope that the expected boom, economic boom in the United States results and it actually happens in the next year or two. And Canada, of course, will benefit, as we always do when they have a boom.
Thank you, Diane. I'm going to ask you to all stay in your seats because there's one more person to speak, but I want to make a very emphatic and heartfelt thank you to our panelists for their contribution today. Fantastic. So I'm going to pass the floor on, but again, if you please stay in your seats, I'm going to pass the floor on to Gillian Riley. Hello, Gillian.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bruce. My name is Gillian Riley, and I'm the president-elect of the Canadian Club. On behalf of the club and all of you that are here today, I think that was a very outstanding panel. It was a great conversation. Bruce, you were an excellent moderator. You really had a lot of energy, but you gave us very insightful questions. So thank you very much to Bruce. And for our panelists, I don't really know where to start, but I can't wait to see 12 months from now what we look back and what was right and what wasn't right. I do remember last year's discussion and what came to bear. So I hope you'll all think about coming back next year because there'll be some more exciting things to talk about. But it was a great discussion, a lot of interesting and provocative thoughts and forecasts. So we'll look forward to see what comes in the year ahead. We definitely live in very exciting times. There's a lot to talk about. We've got the inauguration on January 20th, and the Canadian Club will have lots of great events over the year ahead. And a lot of these issues that will be discussed are here at this podium, so I hope you'll come back and visit some of our events over the year ahead. There is definitely a lot to talk about. I also want to thank again today's sponsors, Bordner Ladner Gervais, Echelon Wealth Partners, E&Y, and Scotiabank, and to our event partner, of course, the National Post, who's been with us for so many years. Thank you very much. We are grateful to Rogers TV and 680 News for their continuing promotion of the Canadian Club events, and also thanks to MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for today's live streaming. To learn more about the Canadian Club, please visit us at canadianclub.org. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at other upcoming events, and there are many that are exciting in the months ahead. Have a wonderful afternoon, and this concludes our program, and you can watch it on Rogers TV in the days ahead. Thank you, and have a great day.